Hi, this conference at this beginning of conference. As you can see, I'm a bit nervous. It will get better later. That's my first conference, actually. And thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I am super excited, super terrified as well, and super happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to also the other talks. I hope you will enjoy mine. I am going to speak about efficient server-state management. And first, let me just introduce myself. So, my name is Elise Patrikainen. I live in Paris. I am a senior front-end developer. I am working at Accor. And last but not least, I am a co-organizer of the meetup Vuejs Paris. And by the way, we are actively looking for speakers. So if you live in the area and you feel like sharing something with the local community, just feel free to come to me, either online or here. If you have the opportunity to be here today and the coming days, I will be very happy to exchange with you. I would also be happy to exchange with you if it is not about the meetup, of course. And yeah, that's all. Oh, and the photo, this is me yesterday when I was heading to the hotel with, of course, my favorite hat. So let's move on to the subject. There are many things that I would like to share with you. And yeah, I hope I will have the time. So let's start with defining what server state is, at least in my opinion, and in the way that I conceive the talk. I have a spoiler for you. This is not about SSR. This is purely about front-end state, really the state which lives on the client. And to define a server state, let's start to define what state is and what state is made of. So the state in an application is made from data. First, data that we fetch from the server. If we fetch some data from the server, generally speaking, that's the case. And also, it is made as well of data owned by our application. I give you an example. I'm sure it will be clearer. Because, yeah, so the first one would be server state, and the other one would be client state. Let's take this small application that I built, which displays a very common e-commerce pattern. So we have a list of products, selectable products, and that we pull from the server, of course. And here we have also a basket, which is, we assume is not persisted server side. So as you probably guessed, the server state is the list of products, and the client state refers to the basket. So all this to arrive to this equation. Global state, the state of our application, is the addition of server state and client state. Okay, so why I am saying all this? Because all the states are not equals. Actually, these two states, client state and server state, are really different. Client state, first point, client state is synchronous, whereas server state is asynchronous, which means that in the case of server state, we will have to handle fetching the data, especially the loading and error states, and we will also have to handle the cache. These are already two good points. The second major difference between these two is about the ownership. Client state has a single ownership. It is fully owned by the application itself. Nothing else can mutate it. Whereas server state has a shared ownership, which means that the data which are on the server can be mutated at any time. If I take the example of my application, well, a product could be at any time become unavailable. Therefore, I will need to refresh it regularly if I want to keep my data up to date, of course. And this can become extremely complicated, quickly. If you want to have an example, a demo actually, of how quickly this can be complicated, it can become complicated, I really advise you to have a look on this talk, which has been made by Natalia, who is a Vue.js core team member. You probably know her. She made this talk here in Amsterdam 2 years ago. It was about server cache. And on the first part of the talk, she really shows how quickly server state management can become complicated. And that's actually with an example with a list of products. So honestly, if you haven't seen the talk, watch it. It's a great talk. And to summarize this question, so why actually is server state management so hard? Because it implies lots of questions. As we have seen, we need to handle different states, error, loading. We will also need to handle request deduplication. Because, for example, if I need the same data in several different components, how can I do? I, of course, don't want to have several requests requesting the same data at the same time. We have the question of catching the data. We have the question of refreshing the data. When do we refresh? How? Do we do that on component mount? Do we pull the data? Do we do that on window focus? On when the user is reconnected? Like, so many cases different. And also, an interesting question is the question of garbage collecting the inactive cache, because server data can be also quite voluminous, and maybe at some point we just want to delete it to preserve some memory. So when do we do that? How do we know that this data is not active anymore? Well, as you can see, many, many questions. So that's the reason why we, generally speaking, often end up with two patterns in our applications. The first one is to keep the server state in the component scope, which means I am mounting a component, I fetch the data, and then when the component is unmounted, the data will be deleted. So that's the first pattern. Of course, there is an issue with it. That's I have no cache. That's the reason why we often move to a second pattern, which is to keep the server state in the store. So here, we have some cache, but we don't have refresh. We still have the refresh to handle, and honestly, I tried, it's not that easy. So what can we do? One solution could be to use a server state management library. There actually are not so many server state management libraries in the Vue ecosystem, but also, I would say, generally speaking. But there are some, and in particular, there is one, which, in my opinion, well, honestly, I think it's quite objective. It's the most complete currently in the ecosystem, currently. And this library belongs to this place. So, a quick quiz. Who knows here what this logo refers to? Please raise your hand if you know it. 1, 2, 3. Oh, wow. Well, I have to admit the logo is 4. Thank you. This logo is not that famous, to be honest. But still, let's see if you know what is behind. And honestly, later, I really advise you to check this out because they are really doing great stuff. So this logo refers to TanStack. Well done for the ones who know it. Congrats. So what is TanStack? TanStack is a set of open source libraries which have been created by Tanner Linsley, so that's why it's called TanStack, and which aim to be framework agnostic. They are currently not all framework agnostic. Some of them are only in React because it comes from the React community, but they aim to be. And among these libraries, there is one which will be particularly interesting to us, which is TanStack Query. So a short history of TanStack Query, because you may know TanStack Query without knowing it. First, there was React Query, which you may have heard about. And then there has been a wrapper around React Query, which was called Vue Query. And then all these have been migrated to TanStack Query. So now it's TanStack Query for everybody. But TanStack Query is completely agnostic, framework agnostic. And when I say agnostic, I mean that it has a core in JavaScript and then some frameworks adaptators. So you can really use it without worrying of having some React code in your code base. And now, after this quite long introduction, let's move to the table of content of this talk. I would like to give you now an overview of TanStack Query, of how it works. Then we will have a demo. We will try to see what interesting things we could do with the library. And then we will have a very quick look on alternatives to TanStack Query. Overview. In my opinion, to get started with TanStack Query, you need to know three things, three concepts, three notions. I don't really know how to define them. The notion of queries, the notion of mutations, and the instance of query client. So the queries and mutations, you may be familiar with it, especially if you are using GraphQL and the Apollo client, because it uses the same API. And actually, that's a pure hypothesis. I don't know, but maybe at the first place, React Query got inspired by the Apollo client API. This would be to be checked. Anyways, so the queries are here to fetch the data. The mutations, you probably guessed it, are here to mutate the data. And the query client is a bit more specific to TanStack Query. It's like a store where our queries and mutations are living. So let's now have a quick look on what a query looks like. And of course, we are using TanStack Query for Vue. It looks like it actually is a composable. So as you can see, that's a composable. It is returning some references relative to the state of the query, such as it is pending or there is an error. And then we configure this composable with an option object. And in this option object, you have two important things to see. You have you have the query key, which is like the ID of the query, and the query function, which is the actual way that you will be fetching your queries. So a short note on that, TanStack Query is completely agnostic on the real way that you fetch your queries, as long as you are returning a promise. Here, for example, I'm using ofetch from NGS. And then you can pass some options. So here I am passing one option, the state time. This is, in my opinion, the most important option in all TanStack Query. This is the interval of time during which a query will be valid. So for example, here we have an interval of time of 60 seconds, 1 minute. This means that for 1 minute, this query will be valid. And after, it will be considered as stale, which means as to be refreshed, if we need it, of course. I would like also to quickly show you another way, a brand new way to declare the queries, which we'll be using later, because it's, to me, one of the most brilliant improvements of the version 5 of TanStack Query, which was released in October. It is the option query API. And the idea will be to extract the query configuration from the query composable and to declare it somewhere else, which is independent. So as you can see, we have here a new function, query options. We take the configuration, the option object, we pass it to the query options, and then we will use the output of the option for our query. So to me, this is important because it really increases query reusability, and also it improves a lot type safety. You will see that's really useful. And that's what we will be using in the demo. So let's have a look on mutation now, and we are almost done. Like the queries were the biggest part. Let's have a look on the mutations. It looks very much like queries. It's also composable. We configure it with a mutation function. We have here one option, what is happening on error. And and as you can see, it's quite similar to queries. There is so an important difference between these two, which is that queries are declarative, whereas mutations are imperative. What I mean with that is that queries will be mostly run automatically by TanStack Query, whereas mutations will be triggered by us. That's exactly what we want. For example, queries can be run when there is a window focus, when the user comes back on our application, because we want then to display some fresh data. And of course, if we were using running mutations each time that there is a window focus, that would be a bit weird, right? So to handle this imperative behavior, use mutation exposes a mutate function, which we can actually use to trigger the mutation. Last but not least, we have the query client. So the query client is, as I mentioned, the store where the queries and mutations are living. And by accessing to it, we would be able to perform lots of operations on this store and lots of interesting things. So we access to it through a composable, use query client. And then we can do, for example, we can prefetch queries, or we can mutate the query cache. So this would be useful, for example, for optimistic updates. Or we can invalidate queries. This is also extremely useful when you have a mutation, because once you mutate something on the server, generally speaking, you may want to refresh your data, because of course there has been a change. Okay, so that's all. Let's go to the demo now. We will try to apply what we have seen here and to see what interesting we could do with this library. So the goal will be to, oh, I'm sorry, there will be something a bit violent now, like a color contrast. I hope it's fine. I just saw this morning that maybe I should have chosen another background for this application. So the idea would be to implement what we have seen in this. So, like, to me, you can save lots of time. It's just great. And also here, I am using Tailwind, and I'm also using Supabase. And Nux provides modules for these two. And last but not least, I am also using the Nux endpoints. So yeah, honestly, I was super happy about this, this tooling. But the idea, of course, is not to use Nux functionalities, I mean, for server state management. So as you can see, I put the SSR configuration to false, and we will just pretend that we are not in a Nux application for the rest of the demo. OK, so now let's try to make our query. So here I have a regular call. As I mentioned, we could have used a composable, such as useFetch, or even viewUse useFetch. I just wanted to keep things simple and the most generalistic possible, so I am using $fetch. But the idea would be the same as soon as we are starting to dealing with the cache. So first I will just comment this, and then we will write the query configuration. So I can put it in another file, thanks to the option query API. And as you can see, it's very similar to what I did. I just put a state time, which is a bit shorter. And then we can use our query out of the box. Let's see if it is working. Seems to be working. Now, if I go somewhere else, like here, and I come back. Sorry, I should have opened this. I just would like to check for the cache. We have some cache working. As we can see, we have still our data, but no call were made. If we wait more than 15 seconds, it should be good now, we have a call which has been made. So it is working. Great. We should do the same for this page. The idea would be completely the same. The only one difference that we have is that here the query is dependent on an ID. So for this reason, that's very easy to handle. We will just, oops, sorry, that's not a good file. We will just, we will just pass the ID here in the query key, and the rest is completely similar. Okay, so that was for the queries implementation. Now let's try to see if we can do a little bit of optimization here. So one thing that we can notice is that if we are going to a new product, I did on purpose a very slow API. We have like something blank. Of course, we could use suspense, we could add a loader. But my point is that when we are coming from the home page to this page, the detail page, we already have a little bit of data that maybe we could reuse as a placeholder instead of waiting for the actual detailed data to be fetched to show the page. Let me show you with the code, maybe it will be clearer. You will see it is surprisingly easy. So what we have to do, we are here in the detail page. We would like to first get back the cache. We would like to, I'm not sure it's really clear, we would like actually to get the data of the product, which was in the product list, to seed our detail page. So first of thing, we get the query, the items queries. We find the cache through the query client, and then we get the relevant item. So I wrap it in a function, get placeholder data. This is the most complicated part of this, which I put in a computer. And then all that we have to do is to pass this placeholder data that we fetch, that we didn't fetch precisely, that we got from our cache, to pass it to our item query. Here, placeholder data.value. And if I go on the item query, I did it already because I'm running out of time. I knew I was going to run out of time. We have here this placeholder data that we pass to the actually query option, because the query option has an option placeholder data. Let's see if it is working. If I go to a new product, as you can see, we at least can display the data that we had already fetched from the list of products, and then we will, oh, this is not a good example because actually there is no more description on that one, sorry. This is from the database. Let's take this article. Have you seen it? So we could display first the data from the list of products to seed the page, and then to display the other data. So this can be an interesting optimization, especially if your first call brings you lots of data. Another interesting thing that maybe we could do would be some prefetching. For example, maybe we could prefetch the item data when the user is mousing over the data. And this one will be impressively fast to implement. I will just go on my product list page, and then I just create a prefetch function thanks to the query client. We have seen this earlier. And I just ask to prefetch the relevant with the relevant key, and then I add a mouse over event. And now let's see if it is working. And it's not working. Prefetch is not a function. Really? Why? If someone sees what's happening, just feel free to let me know, because I am not seeing right now. And I repeat it like 50 times. So I'm really unhappy that it's happening right now. Oh, no, it's actually working. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. That was stressful. So, great. So that's all that we can do for the optimization on the query side. Let's have a look. I may have to go a bit faster on this part, unfortunately, but you can find then the repo, of course, and also maybe I will, if I cannot finish, I will post it on Twitter later. Let's have a look on mutations. So as you can see, we have here a button which lets us add this item to our basket. And what we would like to do is, when the user is selecting an item, to reserve it so it's not available anymore, and he can keep it in his basket. So here, basically, I am doing a post, which will tell my backend, OK, this item is not available anymore. But then we have an issue here, because here we have availability which haven't changed. As you can see, I am adding a new time. It is not changing. So let's do something easy, just to really uncostly have this change. We will use a mutation hook. So this is the use mutation composable. We have the mutation function. And we will add a hook on success. And in case of success, we want to invalidate the query relative to this product. And by the way, since we are also displaying how many products are left on the home page, we will also invalidate that one. So let's check if it is working better. Here I have 3 products left. I add it to the bag. I wait for the call, and it's working. Great. Now, another thing that we could do, because this API is quite long, again, it was made on purpose, would be an optimistic update. I will unfortunately have to go very fast on this, because time is running. But you can find it on GitHub, and actually it's quite simple. All that we do, we cancel ongoing queries, like to make sure there is no issue. Then we get back our cache, we create a new item which has the good availability, and we return it. And also we handle the error case, where we roll back what we just did in case of error. Let's have a try. As you can see, it has been mutated right away. OK, so let's go back on the slide. So that was all for the demo. I would like to share a wonderful resource, which is this blog. So this is the blog of TK Dodo. And he is a contributor of TanStack Query. And his blog is just amazing. Like, he has a bunch of information that's just great. It only has React examples, but I mean, it doesn't matter, because it is really speaking about how we can use cleverly TanStack Query. So it's great. There is also the code of the demo on my GitHub. I know I should have made a QR code for that. I'm sorry. I didn't think about it early enough. And now I just would like to say one word about TanStack Query alternatives. Oops, sorry. TanStack Query alternatives. This will be very short. We have 2 alternatives possible. The first one is Vue Apollo, that you maybe know. Vue Apollo is a state management library. It's great. The only one thing with Vue Apollo is that it's only for GraphQL. You cannot use it with REST. So it's limited to GraphQL, but for GraphQL, it's great. Another extremely interesting project, which is ongoing, is Piña Colada. And so it is built currently by Eduardo Posva, that you certainly know. And it is extremely interesting because it's like the missing server state management part of Piña. And also, the idea behind this project is to give some specific integration between Piña and the Vue router and Piña Colada. So this is extremely promising. I really encourage you to stay tuned on this, because that will be great. And that's all for me. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.